Good, Phil?
Yeah, all set, folks.
Okay, afternoon, everyone. Wanted to get in front of you today and just give you an update, a couple stories in the last couple days in New York City. But first and foremost, we have the tragic incident that took place in the 114th precinct yesterday. About 30 hours yesterday evening, police respond to a location in the 114 precinct, 2307 30th Drive, where we encounter 4 individuals shot, all pronounced DOA at the scene. As we were there last night, it was breaking as we were there. We had crime scenes still on the scene. More details have emerged today to firm up what it appeared to be last night. What we have is an individual, James Shields, male, white, 39 years of age, who was pronounced DOA at the scene. All information here is gleaned really from interviews of family, people at the scene, or in some way, shape, or form, social media scrubs. By that, you see the GoFundMe page that's been reported in the news, et cetera. What this appears to be is a custody battle, essentially. You have the individual, James Shields. You have his current wife, who is one of the deceased. You have his ex-wife, which is one of the deceased. And you have his 6-year-old child in common with the ex-wife. Those are your 4 individuals that were pronounced DOA at the scene. The crime took place in that first floor apartment 1B as in boy, at that location. Totality, and it's still being examined. We still have an active search warrant being taken place at that scene, as well as a vehicle that has a search to be conducted. But we have recovered at this point in time 2 Glock firearms. We've recovered, in addition to the 2 Glock firearms, an additional 7 magazines that were fully loaded on his person, and that's over and above the magazines that were in the 2 guns. So that's an interesting wrinkle in this case. You have approximately, and I say approximately an additional 70 rounds, and what those rounds were meant for or in case of may never be known, but they were on the scene. We have a twist of the case in that this custody battle, and if you look at the GoFundMe page, there's some self-reported statements that his life was spiraling out of control. He makes reference to financial obligations. He did have a business. It appears that he may have in some way operated that business, at least in part, for mailing purposes out of that residence. But financial and custody seems to be the primary reasons behind this tragic incident at this point in time. We have family members of the ex-wife flying in essentially as we speak from the Netherlands. Billy Aubrey on my left. Billy Aubrey's detectives will aid in whatever way possible to meet the family and provide whatever assistance we can to the family in this very difficult time. I'll open it up for some questions on this particular topic.
Yeah, can you identify the ex-wife, the current wife, and the identities?
We'll give you names and we'll push it out to you through DCPI. The only one that I ask is we are attempting to make notifications for the current wife. We're unsure at this time if there is family. So on that one, we may ask for you to hold back on that until we can solidify that.
Was the mother of the child about to leave the country like next week or something?
This is preliminary, but what we have here is an ongoing case where we believe at this point in time that the ex-wife had custody of this child. There has been some agreements in place where visitation has gone on back and forth, where the child would come to the U.S. With this particular visit we have right now, we believe that on or about July 21st of this year, the ex-wife comes to the U.S., flies in with the child. At some point in time, some days after, another friend flies to the U.S., and there was some sort of a visit going on. So it was almost, you could make an assumption that it's a combined, bring the child here, take care of the visitation that must take place, and there'll also be a visit to New York. That person came in and is in contact with our detectives in the 114 precinct today. That person at some point last night had difficulty getting in touch with the ex-wife, reached out to the ex-wife's sister that's in the Netherlands, and that sort of set a series of events in taking place where the sister then actually Googled New York, saw the tragic incident, and in conversations with her, she believed when she saw those stories that something had befallen her sister.
Is that a boyfriend of the ex or someone?
We believe it's a friend. We do not believe it's a boyfriend, but this is preliminary.
Could you talk about any past activity there? Our understanding is police were over there only once previously last year, but neighbors have talked about ongoing fighting there. Can you categorize
Yeah.
use of the word?
So we had a number of discussions with people. As you know, it's essentially an 8-unit dwelling. In canvassing that building and the surrounding buildings, we have spoken to a number of people. All indications that not many of the people that we had spoken to knew the occupants of that apartment very well, that they did see some comings and goings, but I wouldn't categorize it initially as anything alarming. There was, however, a call, I believe it was December of last year, by an occupant of that building reporting fighting going on. Doesn't indicate fighting of a necessarily a physical nature, but they describe fighting as in verbal fighting, possibly things thrown around. But there was an indication at that time that this was the first time that a call had been made by this individual, but it's not the first time that they heard fighting between the male occupant and a female occupant of that apartment.
Was she the ex?
Police and police did respond that evening. The caller had said that the male had left. When the police responded, and again, this is about 8 months ago, they were met by a female, and the female refused to provide any identification. A domestic incident report was filled out, which is standard, and that is the appropriate protocol to follow, with the caption "refused" for the occupant's name, no injuries, etc. So that was essentially the end of the action on that particular evening.
Who found the family? So did that phone call, is that what sparked?
That phone call I just referenced was about 8 months ago.
The most recent one, the friend who traveled here. Is that
No, so there was a, unrelated to that, there was a 9/11 call that set the series of events specifically at this incident in place last night. There is an individual, I won't get into names, but an individual that takes care of the property, I'll categorize it that way, and in the course of taking care of the property, putting garbage out, things of that nature, it's a small apartment in the back of the building. If you're in the backyard and you look in, you see exactly, unfortunately, what took place there. Somebody was in the yard, saw what took place, and made a call to 911, and that's what brought the cops there.
is it like a building order, that kind of thing?
That's one way to categorize it.
Sorry, but was she getting ready to leave with the child? Is that what really set him off?
That's unknown.
Did he have a concealed carry permit?
You were close. He did have a permit. He did not have a concealed carry. He had a resident premise permit. Any indication regarding the 2 firearms that we have at the scene? Both, I believe, Glock pistols, correct, Billy?
Glock 17.
Yeah, one is a Glock 17, one is a Glock 19. The trace on those 2 firearms is being conducted as we speak. There's no indication at this time that they were illegally, so it appears that they were legally purchased at this time. And the 2 guns that we have recovered are 2 guns that are listed on the permits.
Would that be for his business? Is that what?
It's a premise. My understanding is it's a premise. I'd have to get back to you on that, but I don't know that it necessarily entails the business. This is the, I would categorize it as the lower level of a permit. It does not give you the authority to carry it in any way, shape, or form on the streets of New York City, loaded. But that's in fact the guns that they had.
There was some initial
Tony?
report that Mr. Keels had a cut across his neck.
Yep.
Also, the second part of this question is, what kind of business did he have? So Which parts?
The first part of the question is, and maybe we'll just take a few more. It would certainly appear that way. There were reports, possibly with a throat slashed. That was just the nature of the injury, and unfortunately gruesome. But the settling of the blood, there was no throat slashed, to my understanding. It may have appeared that way, somebody looking at it, as possibly, but it was a gunshot wound to the lower part in the area of the chin. And the second part of the question was, if you go on to, I'm sure you've seen, Tony, the social media, the Facebook, etc. There is a number of sites where he advertises what he did for a living. If you take those at their word, and this is still all being vetted out, he was involved in the business of physical therapy currently. He says he formed a business with one other individual. The name of that business was Score. I forget the end of the name. Billy, I don't know if you know the name of it. And that is, in fact, the name that was on the mailbox of his residence. So that's why I say in some way maybe he tied the business to that residence. But it's some sort of providing physical therapy.
Let's just do a couple more on this topic and then follow
Yep.
up on the last
Regarding
one.
the December call, was the woman involved, the ex-wife or current wife?
I'm sorry, repeat that?
Regarding the December call, a few months ago, was the woman involved, the ex-wife?
It's unable to determine that because the woman that answered the door did not provide a name. You could make assumptions, but I don't want to go there.
Shields and current wife, are they American? From here, or are they foreign?
I don't have that information currently.
Last call on this topic.
One more? Rocco?
Is it believed that they were all killed within a matter of seconds, A and B? Can you tell from the risk of the lives if anyone was tied up or resisted?
Yeah, in terms of tied up, no. There's nothing to indicate that. It's a fairly small room, I'll categorize it as, and the deceased were all in close proximity to each other. Impossible for me to say in terms of the time. I would certainly hope so. I would certainly hope so.
Did the ex-wife family give...
Last one this time.
The ex-wife family and the friend, did they give any indication of whether they were worried about her being around him and if he had been abusive, the reason for the divorce?
I think it's a little preliminary on that. I have not seen or heard anything, but again, our detectives are meeting them this evening. We will be with them. We will try to help them in this very difficult time, and certainly that is something that we will just try to connect the last pieces of this, try to put it to bed.
Thanks, guys. We gotta wrap it up here.
No indication of that. All right.
You want to put that back up?
Pivot, I mean, only if we have it.
So you had asked about the case, California case. There's a couple questions on that.
You know, just before we get to California, let me just go to, how about we go to Brooklyn for a second. Just never shy to talk about some of the good work our detectives are doing. We had a terrible incident in Brooklyn last week with 3 individuals shot in the middle of the afternoon in a playground. That shooting resulted in 1 individual losing their life. When you look at Brooklyn currently, we have had some incidents of gang violence and continue to really shore up our strategies to combat these violent acts. In this particular incident, we had an individual that was killed. This individual was a Trinitarios gang member. We have made now 2 arrests in the last 3 days regarding this incident. First arrest was this Saturday evening. We identified and arrested the individual that pulled the trigger and committed this murder. That individual was Damian Fuller. That arrest was made Saturday evening. The additional arrest that you may or may not have is an individual, Nige Johnson, not charged with the murder, but arrested in connection to the ongoing investigation. He was placed under arrest yesterday, recovered, and recovered at the scene was a .22 caliber firearm. I'll point out that that is the same caliber of firearm that was used in the homicide. It is unknown at this time if it is the exact murder weapon, but those tests will be conducted as we go forward. The current charges on Mr. Johnson is criminal possession of a weapon, and that case is being prosecuted by the Kings County DA's office. The individual charged with the murder at this point was Damian Fuller. The second individual is Nijee, Nijee Johnson.
Which one's a Trinitario?
The victim was a Trinitario in that case.
Is Damien with 2 A's or A&E and are either?
We'll give it to you, but it's Damien.
Are he your Mr. Johnson Trinitario or both or something else?
Well, here is what I will say. I've testified long and hard on this topic regarding our criminal group database. I've said publicly that the number of gang members in New York City exceeds the number that we have in that criminal group database. Neither of these individuals are in our criminal group database, but we definitively know that gang played a role in this shooting, and we have very solid corroborated information regarding that. So the investigation goes forward, but at this time, neither of those two individuals are in our gang database.
Where was Mr. Johnson picked up? You said the firearm was found at the scene.
He was picked up in a residence, and we can get you that address. And last but not least, we'll shift gears to, if you have any questions on the cross-country 105 precinct homicide, 7-2 precinct rape, and then the out and flight to California.
Los Angeles police are saying that he's allegedly making statements claiming that there are several deaths associated with the conduct, as many as 5 or 7. What is he saying, and is there any evidence to back it up with numbers here in New York?
Yeah, well, as I said the other day, this was very alarming when we sat down and took a look at this as it was breaking. The course of conduct of this individual, his history, his pedigree, what he had been arrested for in the past, and what we knew he did now really was the source of that alarm. The priority from the beginning was to get this dangerous person off the street. I think that bore out as we apprehended him, and he was in the act of committing another crime. So we were very thankful for our help with our partners in getting that done. Once that was done, we have a lot of work to do. He has made statements. Alluding to his participation in other crimes, including other homicides. Everything has to be vetted at this point in time. Some of it takes place, what he alludes to, in New York City, and some of it is alluding to acts committed outside New York City. We have not been able to verify a single act, homicide if you will, that he has mentioned and matched it up to an open homicide. There was reporting of a case in the Bronx involving an individual that was killed, arrests made, and now those arrests, the person was released on their own recognizance. I think that's a little error in assessing the facts there. That case that was reported in the paper was an individual that was punched, fell down, hit his head, and wound up passing away. The individual arrested for that is a solid case, and the individual arrested that was in fact ROR'd, released on their own recognizance, but that's not out of the ordinary for what is termed a one-punch fall-down homicide. At this point in time, any comments that he's made to us about his participation in other crimes has not been verified yet, but there is a lot of work to do. At this point, we have gone out publicly and asked for the public to reach out to our Special Victims Rape Hotline. We've also obviously advertised our Crime Stoppers regarding this case and any other case that people may have information on. Regarding this individual and this series of events, we have received 0 calls to Crime Stoppers or to our rape hotline specifically about this individual to date. I think you could look at that 2 ways. I don't want there to be other victims, and I think that's good news. But if there are other victims, we do need them to call. We do need to fully investigate those and get people the help that they deserve.
Let's get a couple more in here, guys, and we'll wrap it up.
What types of crimes is he saying that he's responsible for? He's talking about murders, rapes, dirt biking. And do you have any sense of his mental state?
I would not comment on his mental state. In terms of the first question, specifically, he has spoken about participation by himself in other murders.
Last call here.
In connection with this case, have you trying to match any DNA samples from him to any other cases that are in the database?
Yeah, I mean, that is, we'll follow the lawful processes that are in place. We will be working with the prosecutors. We now have 3 prosecutors involved in this case. We have a Queens District Attorney on the homicide. We have the Brooklyn District Attorney on the 7-2 precinct rape. And now we have the California matter to take care of. We will be petitioning as appropriate in our Queens and our Brooklyn case to get court-ordered DNA samples. And then we will go from there in terms of where that DNA leads us.
When do you expect them back here?
It's very difficult to say. This is a unique case.
15 seconds of the burglary case, 2 brothers.
You're never satisfied, Rocco. Yeah, sure. Sure. An interesting case. What we have here, and this is off the cuff, so let me just, a little bit preliminary, but we have a call to a house where an individual has passed away. We have that individual struck with a blunt object by occupants of that house. We're working very closely with the Queens DA's office, our Queens homicide, and our local squad in there to get to the bottom of the facts. We had early reports that the individual that is deceased was breaking into the house. That needs to be corroborated. And at this point in time, we're in the fact-gathering phase. The individual that passed away does have, he is known to us, let me put it that way, in terms of he has crossed our path before. So we're still trying to determine what exactly took place here. Was the individual in the house? Did he get into the house? What led to this initial encounter? And as that investigation and facts bear out, we'll see whether a criminal prosecution is supported.
He has a New York, I know he's from Maryland, he has a Maryland address, but he has a New York record as well.
I'm not going to get into his record, but he is known to us.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.